Is it finally here? I'm talking about the age of the flying car. Hi there, everyone. I'm Jeff, and this is Plain English, where we help you upgrade your English with stories about current events and trending topics. Today's story is about flying cars. They are almost here. This is happening. You'll learn about what the first flying cars will be like in today's story. Now, this is a great story because you're going to hear some words about flying and cars and helicopters. Even I learned a new word preparing the story. I learned the word vertiport. So listen up for that. Now, you'll also learn a common English expression today. Creep closer is the one I chose. There is a literal and a more figurative meaning. Creep closer is the expression today. This is lesson number 684. So that means our producer, JR, has uploaded the lesson to plainenglish.com/684. Before we dive into today's story, you've heard me mention some of the great ways our Plus membership can help you upgrade your English, and you might be curious about what that looks like. We've recently unlocked some free samples so that you can try out the premium features for yourself. Even if you don't join, you'll still learn something from the sample lessons. Sound good? Look for the link that says free samples at the top of plainenglish.com. I've also put a direct link to the samples at the bottom of the show notes of this episode. Now, we're ready to start today's story. The idea of a flying car has fascinated generations of futurists. In 1962, the world met George Jetson, the cartoon character from 100 years in the future. He takes a flying car to work every day. The first Back to the Future movie came out in 1985. It featured a time-traveling and flying DeLorean car. But no matter how much time passes, it seems that flying cars exist only in the movies or in our imaginations. The sad fact is, 138 years after the car was invented, and 121 years after the airplane was invented, the dream of a flying car is just that, a dream. But now, it is just possible to imagine a future of flying cars. A new generation of electric flying vehicles is creeping closer to commercial viability. For flying cars to become reality, 3 things have to line up: technology, regulations, and the market. Let's take a look at each one. Start with technology. It's now becoming clear what the first generation of flying cars will really be like. They are called electric, vertical, takeoff, and landing vehicles. That's a mouthful. Electric, vertical, takeoff, and landing vehicles, or eVTOLs for short. The name gives it away. They are electric, so they run on batteries, and they take off and land vertically like a helicopter. Most eVTOLs look like big drones with room for a pilot and between 1 and 4 passengers. Some are autonomous. They don't even have a pilot. At the bottom, they have skis, much like a helicopter. Helicopters have a single set of large rotors on the top, but eVTOLs look more like drones. They have multiple sets of smaller rotors. eVTOLs are fast. Some of them can go up to 300 kilometers per hour. They're also relatively quiet, like a drone. They're not silent, but they are a lot quieter than helicopters and airplanes. Where can they go? eVTOLs take off and land vertically like a helicopter. So, like a helicopter, they need specially designed ports. A helicopter takes off from and lands at a heliport. An eVTOL will take off from and land at a vertiport. Add that to your vocabulary. Ready for takeoff? Not quite so fast. Flying car companies need government permission to operate. And it's not just a matter of getting a thumbs up. Governments need to create a whole new regulatory framework to deal with flying cars. Think about it. This is an entirely new type of transportation, which presents an entirely new type of question. How can flying cars avoid crashing into one another? How can we make sure they don't interfere with traditional airplanes? How will we know when they're safe enough for passengers? What type of certification will pilots need? And if there aren't pilots, how can we be sure the software that controls the vehicle is safe? All of these problems have to be worked out, and there's no template. Governments are extremely safety conscious with air travel. They're moving slowly with flying cars. And then finally, there's the market. Where will eVTOLs operate and who will pay to use them? Since they require a vertiport, and since each unit costs over $1 million, eVTOLs will almost definitely start as taxis, not as personal flying cars. And they won't be as flexible as taxis on the road. At the beginning, they'll operate on a limited number of fixed routes. Where might those be? One great place to start would be with common taxi routes in big cities. For example, between a city center and the airport. This makes sense because this is a high-value route. Business people have to get to the airport, and they're often willing to pay more to save time. What about rural areas? Well, in a truly rural area, there aren't heavily traveled point-to-point routes, but flying taxis could cut the cost of commuting from a small, faraway city to a big city. There are also popular vacation routes for wealthy people. Think New York City to the Hamptons, or Boston to Cape Cod, or Silicon Valley to Lake Tahoe. Or how about mega events? The world was going to have an up-close look at flying cars at the Paris Olympics. A German startup, Volocopter, was set to transport passengers in its eVTOL at the Olympic Games. But it looks like they won't get the government permission they need. For now, it seems like the first place that will have legitimate flying taxis will be Dubai. Dubai's transportation regulator signed a contract with a startup that will allow flying taxi service starting in 2026. Funny thing about imagining the future, in 1962, when the Jetsons came out, they imagined George Jetson taking a flying car to work. They didn't imagine him living a life that didn't require him to go to work every day. They just imagined him taking a cooler car to get to the office. It's kind of crazy that there aren't flying cars yet, right? In the last decade, there have been incredible, unimaginable innovations in digital technology. Think about ChatGPT. In cars, and especially airplanes, there has been a lot of advancement in technology. It's just we don't notice it because most of it has been incremental improvements on the basic form that we already have. Peter Thiel, the co-founder of PayPal, expressed his disappointment this way. He said, "We were promised flying cars. Instead, we got 140 characters." This is a funny one. Creep closer. To creep is to move your body slowly, kind of close to the ground. A spider creeps across a room. If you creep up on someone, you move slowly and quietly to surprise the person. Creep closer is related. You can use this literally. Something slowly moves closer to something else. A toddler might be afraid to go down the stairs, but he might be curious, so he might creep closer to the edge of the stairs. He crawls slowly, curiously, right up to the edge. A cat might creep closer to a mouse, slowly moving close to the ground, little by little, getting closer. You can use creep closer with things that are not living. Let's say you build a sand castle on the beach in low tide. That means the edge of the water is farther out. The tide, a few hours later, will creep closer to your sand castle. Every wave might get just a teeny tiny bit closer to your sand castle until the tide overwhelms it. The tide can creep closer to your sand castle. If you're in a flooded area, the water in the street might creep closer to your front door. That's a scary feeling. The water line gets a little closer, inch by inch, toward your door. But very often, we use creep closer to talk about a date or an event in the future that gradually seems or feels closer as time goes on. This is ironic because the thing in the future is not moving. We are the ones moving through time. But still, we say the thing in the future is creeping closer. It makes no sense, I know, but that's what we say. I used to work in consulting and we'd do projects. And each project would have a deadline. And when we started the project, the deadline often seemed far away, like 6 weeks away. That's forever. We have plenty of time. But then, as the deadline crept closer, we would start to feel the pressure. It feels and seems closer because it is closer. Every day that went by, the deadline was one day closer. It was creeping closer. Kind of like the deadline was the cat and we were the mouse. So after 4 weeks, we'd say, yikes, we have only 14 days left. The deadline is creeping closer, so we have to be efficient in our work. Sometimes things are in the future, but we don't know exactly when they will arrive. The age of flying cars. Almost since the invention of the car, people have fantasized about flying cars. I think there's a general sense that this will happen someday. We just don't know when. But things are happening today, and now it's possible to imagine what the age of the flying car will be like. Flying cars exist. The vehicles exist. Governments are studying the regulations. They were almost approved for the Paris Olympics. And one government, Dubai, has already approved a flying taxi company to operate in 2026. So the age of the flying car is not here yet, but it is creeping closer. It feels closer. What day will it arrive? Will it be 2026? I don't know exactly, but it sure feels a lot closer now than it felt 2, 3, 4 years ago. And that's why I say that the age of flying cars is creeping closer. Well, the end of this plain English audio lesson is creeping closer. Just a minute or two left, and the audio will go silent on Spotify, your podcast player, or on the website, wherever you listen. The end of this episode is creeping closer. But the good news is that there's always something more to do at plainenglish.com. This lesson is at plainenglish.com/684. You go on there, you take the quiz, do the exercises, write a comment on the story, write your own example of Creep Closer. And if you're still in the mood for more English, we have a toolkit full of workshops with videos, exercises, and plenty of chances to practice. And live calls on Zoom and so much more. So even though the end of this episode is creeping closer, it's even closer now than it was before. Even though the end of this audio is creeping closer, you can continue to work on English with us at plainenglish.com/684, all thanks to our producer, JR. We'll be back on Thursday with a new story and a new expression. See you then. You've reached the end of the audio lesson, but there's a lot more to the Plain English experience on the website plainenglish.com. A lot of plainenglish.com is free, but the best tools to help you upgrade your English are part of the Starter and Plus memberships. And if you've ever been curious about what those look like, well, I have good news for you. We've unlocked some free sample lessons that let you try out the Starter and Plus features for yourself. There are 2 easy ways to find the free samples. First, at plainenglish.com, there's a new link at the top of the page that says Free Samples. I've also put a link in the show notes for this episode. In the sample lessons, you can do the exercises, listen to the fast audio, take one of our toolkit workshops, practice your writing, and more. So try it out today. Click the link in the show notes of this episode, or find the link that says free samples at the top of plainenglish.com.